Next up, we have Elementos. Elementos, trading under the ASX code ELT, with a market capitalization of approximately $18 million, owns two world-class tin projects with large resource bases and significant exploration potential in mature mining jurisdictions. Presenting for the company today, we have Managing Director Joe David. Joe, welcome back to the network, and please take it away.
G'day, Peter. Always good to be back with the Share Cafe and your audience. We'll flick through the two slides here. Obviously, this we put this on the ASX yesterday to support the webinar. The ASX is a slightly longer version than we have here, so please go and read the disclosure statement. And if you want more information, have to flick through that version. So yes, we are a dual project developer with our major flagship tin asset in the Andalusia region of Spain. We recently have signed a term sheet option agreement over a tin smelter that's 220 kilometres away, as well as developing our the old Cleveland tin mine, which shut down in 1986 in Tasmania. From the company's perspective, the main focus, we're certainly a developer, and I liked Damien's wording of that, rather than an explorer on our Spanish project in Andalusia, with our Cleveland tin project being closer to, I guess, still working through an exploration phase, despite it being a brief and restart operation. So for us, both assets have very mature resource bases. We've got 19.6 million tonnes of tin resource in Spain, and we're the only, there are no operating tin mines within the European Union. We are the only real developer in the European Union, and certainly our focus with the bringing on this smelter will be to be a fully integrated mine to metal tin supplier for the European Union and the member states within the Union. Currently, they're pretty much fully reliant on imported tin from out of countries within Asia, as well as having some recycling processes as well. So certainly removing a lot of geopolitical risk, which is obviously a focus of major economies around the world right now. But maybe move on to the next slide. So for us, as we said, we've got two projects. The Spanish project is highly defined. We've done all the technical work to deliver that project. We're currently completing a DFS. We're currently submitting our primary approvals. Our primary approvals will be submitted by in the next month or month and a half. And that's our environmental and mining license, with the aim of having them in hand by the end of calendar year 2025, as well as that, DFS approvals. And we've got our Spanish smelter acquisition. So really on the back end there, no further exploration, no further metallurgy, geotech, hydro, environmental studies, or the rest of it. That asset's in the final stages of reporting in the DFS. Getting to the Tassie asset, I guess that's more the blue sky exploration opportunity. I've recently done some drilling there, released our results as recently as yesterday and today. We have a tin copper resource down in Tassie, 7.5 million tonnes at 0.75% tin, with a byproduct of 0.3% copper. But for us, we also have a very, very, very interesting looking tungsten resource, which we've just released the results of yesterday. So the next step for that will be to either do some further exploration or take it through the early stages of formal reporting, which is a scoping study. Next slide, please. So before I get on the tungsten story, which is interesting, we are focused on tin. Tin is a critical mineral. This chart here is one done by Rio Tinto and MIT a couple of years ago. Effectively, tin is main use is in electrical solders. 95% of all electrical solders are made of tin. So pretty much, if you believe electrification, moving automation, AI, data centers, and the rest of it, we're going to need a lot more tin than we currently have now, predominantly for the use of solder. Next slide, please. The tin price has done very well. It's been the best performing of the base metals over this calendar year, and still showing a lot of strength during pretty weak macroeconomic environment. The reason for that is many problems in the supply side, with the current major producers really struggling to maintain current demand. Next slide, please. Why is there challenges? Well, you look where the global tin comes from. It comes from countries with relatively low regulation, relatively low ESG standards, and to be honest, a lot of the good stuff, easy stuff, the alluvial stuff at surface is gone, and the world's moving into hard rock mining, of which our two assets are. But you look at the list of countries: Indonesia, China, Myanmar, Central Africa, South American countries with only very little coming out of Australia, about 10,000 tonnes of 360,000 tonnes per year. Europe currently has none. The small mine that was in Europe isn't producing right now. And in addition to that, there's absolutely no tin produced in North America. So some major economies there, reliant on some developing countries with lower standards. So our two assets sitting in Australia and in Spain, very well placed to deliver into that market. Chart on the right just shows the drop off of the current producers. Next slide, please. So before I talk about tin too much, I will go through the tin and our Tassie asset. Most people will see me focus on our Spanish asset, but certainly based on a recent news, I'd like to talk about our Tassie asset. We do have 7.5 million tonnes of tin, which I've covered, but interestingly enough, we've always had these 4 million tonnes since we picked up the project of inferred tungsten, which is about 320 metres below the underground entry. It is an old mine, as I mentioned, and this very large exploration target. The combination of these two assets in one ore body would make it one of the world's largest by tonnage tungsten mines. So if you go on to the next slide, we're very happy to announce yesterday that we've drilled into that exploration target sitting below the mineral resource, and we've hit a 420 metre intercept of what is very clearly, visually only at this point, still waiting on assays, quartz veins, very regular quartz veining in a porphyry-style deposit with very clearly identified wolframite. There is also supporting molybdenum and a fair bit of fluorite and chalcopyrite. So a lot of critical minerals just came out of my mouth there. We're very excited to see the assays, which are going to come back from the lab in the coming weeks, and we'll keep the market up to date there. But certainly for our second non-core asset for the company, this we really believe could be a game changer in what our Tassie asset looks moving forward, and certainly on how we approach its future development. Next slide, please. There's just a good photo of some of the quartz with the wolframite and molybdenum that we're currently intersecting. Next slide, please. Getting onto our main asset, and I'm conscious of time, so I'll fly through. Apologies. This is our major asset. We are in Andalusia. That is critical for us. We're a state significant project within the region of Andalusia. Andalusia, the Spanish regions are more independent than the Australian states, and Andalusia is the major mining region of Spain. 90% of Spain's mining revenue comes out of Andalusia, and there's a number of very large miners there. Sandfire Resources is the biggest Australian listed miner in the region. First Quantum's in there at the Cobre Las Cruces asset, as well as Atalaya Mining, another large guy. So it is a mature mining region with very supportive mining laws and support to bring on more projects. Next slide, please. This is just a picture of the smelter option, 220 kilometres away, which is very advantageous for us. We've signed an option for 50% of that, which I said will make us a fully integrated mine to metal producer within the European Union. Next slide, please. So our resource, very quickly, our resource is very mature, 95% of it sitting in measured and indicated. That's obviously the resource category you need to convert to JORC reserves. At the end of our DFS, obviously the plan is to convert our resources into reserves, at least to a high percentage, and we've done all the drilling we need to get there. We just got to push it through the formal studies. Next slide, please. There's also a zinc resource on the project. This is a byproduct credit. It's not the main focus, but certainly good to have another revenue stream that'll be coming through for the project in its future. Next slide, please. In terms of the scale, 1.25 million mining rate goes through an ore sorter. So we put about 1 million tonnes through the front of the plant. We put it through a crushed grind, sulfide flotation, goes through a gravity plant, then gets some tin flotation on the back end. Together, those two streams form a tin concentrate, 5,400 tonnes per annum, 3,350 tonnes of contained metal, which is about 1% of the global tin market. Very significant for a single mine to do that in any commodity, but also critical for us will be 100% of the domestic European tin market. So for us, at least in their mined market. So that's obviously very strategic for us. We ran the study a couple of years ago at pretty much today's tin price. 220 million US, 86 million capex costs. So, a nice small size project there, but certainly one we think can be very profitable, especially into what we believe will be stronger tin prices in the future. Next slide, please. In terms of the regulation side, we have gone through about a 12-month consultation process with government, which has resulted in agreeing the project layouts. As I said, within the next month or so, we'll be submitting our primary license applications. Goal is to have them in hand by the end of 2025 and be producing back end of 2027. Next slide, please. In terms of the technical data, I've been through this. All the hard work's done. We're just currently doing some work on modifications of the mine plan, the tailings dam location and the waste dumps, but very mature and all that. No further on-site work required. Next slide, please. In terms of our board, very experienced board here. My chairman's a guy called Andy Gregg. He worked for Bechtel for 35 years, which is the US's largest engineering and construction firm, privately held. He is also the largest shareholder of Elementos, currently about 15% and soon to go closer to 20% when we finish our current capital raise, but very, very supportive shareholder there. Next slide, please. We're currently trading at about $20 million market cap. And certainly, and I guess just for warning, the shares and the cash and the debt position are currently in flux right now because we're currently in the midst of a capital raise. If you go on to the next slide, there's a bit more detail there. We did do a private placement and get pre-commitments to our entitlement offer. $3 million came to the company. 1.5 of that came from the chairman and my major shareholder, Andy. So he's a big supporter of the company, certainly has a very robust belief of what we're delivering. But what we've also got for any ELT shareholders on the call, the entitlement offer is currently still open. We're offering 1 new share for every 6 held. For applicable shareholders, we're aiming to raise up to 3 million of that, 9.5 cents per share with an attached option, 1 for 2 at 18 cents. So certainly we believe compelling value there for shareholders to take up their rights, and I'd certainly encourage them to do that. Next slide, please. I think we're pretty much at the end. So I tried to rush there at the end, Peter. Hopefully the guys caught the messages.
No, that's all good. Thank you, Joe. We heard you loud and clear. You've obviously had a busy week. You've had 2 announcements and then I think another amendment today on one of the announcements.
Yes.
But let's start with your first announcements. So securing the 4 additional tenements adjacent to the Oropesa tin project.
Yep.
Can you just explain this a bit more detail and explain the significance of this?
Yeah, so we picked up, they were previously 4 tenements, but for us, they'll be 3 tenements. And 2 of those are directly adjacent to our Oropesa project. So the Oropesa project is a single tenement, but now we have the asset directly west. We also have the tenement directly east. There is mineral prospectivity and we believe extensions to the tin resource potentially in both those directions, which is fantastic. In addition to that, we've spent a bit of time crawling over the tenements and going through the Spanish government's geological databases, including the core library, which just happens to be 10 kilometers away from our project, which is absolutely a blessing. And yeah, we believe it's quite prospective for not only tin, there's some copper prospectivity in the northwest. There's outcropping fluorite in the project at the east, another critical mineral. And we've picked up one other asset about 5 to 7 kilometres in the southeast of our Oropesa one, still within about 5 kilometres of where we have our offices and warehouses and all our staff. And that looks quite prospective for both dysprosium, which is a rare earth element, and actually some porphyry copper. So, they're not elements that we're necessarily in the main suite of Elementos, but when you can get access to something that potentially has those elements, of course, you're going to pick it up.
And obviously, just looking at that next announcement, the Cleveland Tin Project intersects approximately 420 meters of tungsten mineralization. Can you just explain to us, you mentioned it in the slide deck, but can you explain this in a bit more detail, what this means for Elementos, and then what are the next steps at that Cleveland Tin Project? Yeah,
so for us, the tin resource that already sits there, 7.5 million tons of tin with 0.3% copper sitting against it. For us, historically, we've looked at developing that asset. And, it probably was, maybe, unofficially not a formal study, but probably about 7 to 8 years mine life. For us, we've always liked to push that mine life up before we took it through any formal studies, and obviously then take that through financing and whatnot. So we've spent a little bit of time, not the major focus of the company, looking for extensions to that resource. We have found some. However, ever since we picked up the project, there's always had this tungsten deposit at depth. Now, the old workings and the old decline of the mine do go into the top of this tungsten resource, 4 million tonnes that it's currently defined. But again, these things work best on scale. So we've drilled a very large hole from surface, but from the other side of the hill, which has never been drilled for, or not we're aware being drilled for before, to get a specific angle. So we've come on and tested the full depth of the resource and at least a good portion of the width by coming at it across that tungsten ore body. And we've hit it, fortunately, exactly where the guys have modeled. And it's very large, 420 meters of tungsten, as I said, could be, on an upside scenario, one of the larger resources. The grade obviously is critical, and we're going to get out the assays next couple of weeks. But for us, what that then becomes is we then have two very distinct mineralizations. And obviously the next step is to start either do further exploration or start running it through the studies. See if we target the tungsten first, then into the tin copper, whether you do tin copper, whether you do them both. They're not that dissimilar in their processing. So we'll look at all the opportunities, but I can't give you a defined path yet, but it's definitely good news for an asset that's been proved historically, operated for about 40 years through the 1900s. So nice to give, I guess, that project another bit of shot in the arm, and certainly it's going to take a bit more focus from the company in the years moving forward.
We look forward to seeing what happens with the next steps at the Cleveland Tin Project. But I just want to shift back to the Oropesa. How on track are you guys to complete that DFS?
Yeah, we are on track to complete. As I said, the main focus for us right now in terms of management is getting those license applications in. So we're focusing on that. In saying that, obviously, a lot of the inputs that go into those license applications support DFS, and a lot of that work's been done. So basically, once we get those submissions in end of September, start of October, we will refine the time frame of getting that DFS out. It'll either be at the end of this year or slipping into the start of Q1 2025.
Okay, brilliant. Just last question. I just want to talk to you about, you mentioned tin being the best performing of all the base metals on LME this year, even outperforming copper. But what has been driving this price surge, and why do you think tin has been flying under the radar?
Yeah, so one of the key things, like the China thematic's obviously affecting Australia, the drivers from China quite substantially. And Australia tends to, at least the media tends to report that based on how it's affecting our major exporters, being iron ore and coal. Now, those guys are probably a lot more exposed to the construction, the infrastructure sectors within China. Tin's not. Tin's an electronics story, and really, electronic demand and use isn't really dropping. Now, fair to say, tin and electronics went on a massive boom through COVID when everyone was setting up their home office and cash was cheap, so everyone was buying the second or third iPad for the kids or whatever. There definitely was a demand pullback after that, and tin price did drop a little bit. But where we're at now, we're not at super strong demand. We forecast the demand will get a lot stronger in this current high inflationary environment. People are delaying buying that new iPhone or delaying buying, the fourth iPad for the kids. But what we're saying, what's driving the price now is the supply side. The supply side has got major constraints. So Indonesia, which is the second largest miner, has had major licensing and corruption issues. So the output of refined tin out of Indonesia has completely dropped away. China, most of their imports of ore and concentrate were coming across the board from Myanmar. There is currently, which is the second biggest miner, there is currently a mining ban in Myanmar, and so that feedstock for their smelters in the south of China is not coming across. The output of the smelters is dropping off, the production of metals dropping off, and it's forecast to get even worse in the next little while based on the reports coming to the market. So it really is a supply side challenge at the moment. It's driving the price, but it won't take long for demand to come back into the industry at all. And when the demand comes back, that's when silly things happen to the tin price, like during COVID when the tin price went up over $50,000 a tonne.
Thanks, Joe. Always good to have you on. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.